All right. So for this morning, we are going to be thinking about the topic of a family's schedule, and in particular, extracurricular activities. I think this will be really helpful for wherever you're at in your stage of parenting. I think this is a very, very, very practical class for parents who have kids where they have the opportunity to participate in extracurricular activities. But I think this is also going to be really helpful for those of us, such as myself, who have little ones where they don't necessarily have this opportunity just yet until they get to school age. But I think it will be helpful for us because I think we can begin developing rhythms in our home that will make this transition for when these opportunities come and make it much more successful. So as we discuss this topic of extracurricular activities, I want us to continue our conversation where we're thinking in the back of our minds, just in light of what we've discussed the last 2 weeks. Okay, week 1, we discussed God's calling of us as parents. We are the ones who have this ultimate responsibility to point our kids to Jesus, to show them Jesus, to teach them, to make disciples of them. And then last week, we thought about thinking through common roadblocks that are keeping us from having regular family faith talks. And so I want us to be thinking about those things as we're talking about extracurricular activities. And the question that I want us to ask is just how can we be good stewards of the time that God has given to us with our kids? Because there will come a day where our kids ought to leave our homes, right? And so how can we be good stewards of that? How do we make wise, godly decisions when it comes to so many good opportunities that we can sign our children up for? You know, I'm thinking specifically of organized sports. I'm thinking of music lessons, thinking of choir, art club, drama club, theater, academic clubs, community service, work internships, part-time employment when your kids are at that high school age. How do we think through those different opportunities as we think in light of our calling to be disciple makers of our children's lives? So I want to ask just a very simple question, and this is just to kind of get our brains thinking, okay? So don't think too deeply, and it's a very, very simple question. My question that I want us, and I want your answers, why do you think good-intentioned Christian parents, such as yourselves, sign kids up for extracurricular activities? Why do we do this? Out of the house, off devices. Out of trouble. Social skills, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Development of skills. Yeah. It's good for our kids to have structure, right? We don't want our kids to be lazy. We don't want, we want our kids to grow in skills and talents, okay? These are all these good biblical desires for us to have as parents? Absolutely. And can God use extracurricular activities to help our children grow in these things? Yeah, absolutely. So what I don't want you guys to hear from me as we get talking about this is that I am poo-pooing the idea of extracurricular activities, okay? I love extracurricular activities. I am all about it, okay? I think, in Scripture, God calls us to instill these desires that we have for our kids, okay? So, but what I want us to talk about this morning are 2 areas of the Christian life that I would argue more often than not get compromised without realizing it when we sign our kids up for extracurricular activities, okay? And I see this more so of just a common problem of the day, a common problem that I see taking place in Christian homes all throughout America and maybe even the world. So my goal for this morning is to bring these two important areas to light, two areas of the Christian life that your kids, they need exposure to. And it's my hope that before you sign up little Johnny or little Susie, for that sport or for that music club, that you and your spouse would have serious conversations about, what I'm going to bring up, okay? Because here's the common problem that I think every Christian family wrestles with because of the culture that we live in, okay? How many of you wrestle with this? I know I do. All of us wrestle with busyness. I mean, have you guys ever complained like me about how busy your life is for your family? Have you ever had those moments where you find yourself wondering how in the world, you and your children are going to participate in the activities, that the church provides and the activities that the school provides. And then you got Little League Club and AAU basketball and you have, music lessons. How do we juggle all these different things? And I don't think that there's any good parent out there who doesn't desire for their kids to just simply achieve in life. You know what I mean? I mean, we want our kids to achieve high ACT scores, do we not? We want our kids to achieve academic scholarships or athletic scholarships. We want them to achieve in athletic honors and even, if your child has the opportunity to work, we want them to, have a financial savings before they go off to college, okay? These are all very good things for our kids to achieve. But as Timothy Paul Jones, who I've mentioned before, as he said in his book, Family Ministry Field Guide, he said, whenever any activity, however good it may be, becomes amplified to the point that no time remains for family members to disciple one another, a divinely designed joy has been distorted into a hell-spawned idol. So when it comes to extracurricular activities, while we want what's best for our child, we are ultimately called to lay our desires down as mom and as dad before the throne of the Lord and pray what Jesus taught us to pray. Father, not my will, but yours be done, right? So what does this look like, practically speaking? How do we as parents accurately assess whether we are setting up a rhythm in our home that either A, feeds our children's souls, or B, leaves our children's souls to starve, okay? I want to, there's a number of people that I'm going to be echoing. People who have been down this road, people that I respect and I admire. I'm very much, the makeup of this morning is going to be echoing what these people have said. So I mentioned Timothy Paul Jones. He's going to come up later again. Paul David Tripp is another excellent theologian who I think speaks great wisdom, great truth into this topic. And even Jen Wilkin. Jen Wilkin is another one who has written articles and has participated in podcasts that are very, very helpful for us to think through. So I'm very much going to be echoing what they said. I was listening to, I take that back. I was reading this article from Jen Wilkin where she talks about how she and her husband, they attended their son's high school orientation. And Jen Wilkin, she lives in the Dallas, Texas area. Her kids go to public school, and this was roughly 10 years ago when this took place. But Jen Wilkin was talking about how during her son's high school orientation, there was a time where the high school counselors came up on stage and they were speaking to all the parents in the auditorium. And one of the things that they were speaking about is just how, as of lately, they wanted parents to know of some of the greatest challenges that they are facing and dealing with the high school students of that school. And to Jen's anticipation, she was thinking that, the counselors were going to talk about the usual, such as poor study habits. They were going to talk about how too much partying is a bad thing, and that your kids should stay away from drugs and alcohol and so on and so forth. But that wasn't what the counselors brought up. What the counselors brought up in that orientation is that there's a growing number of kids in their high school and in high schools all over America who are struggling mightily with anxiety and depression. I see a high school teacher nodding her head right now. And the counselors went to say that the two main things that are contributing to their anxiety and to their depression is an overcommitment in extracurricular activities, such as sports, clubs, even working a job. And the second thing that they mentioned was too much time on their devices, okay? There's a lot I want to say about devices, but I don't want to steal Pastor Will's thunder. So you're going to have to come back next week to hear about that, okay? But extracurricular activities and screen time as being the two main contributing factors to their anxiety and to their depression. Now, again, hear me out. I'm not saying that devices or that extracurricular activities are inherently evil in and of themselves, because they're not. God created those things. God created those things for us to enjoy and for us to grow in maturity. But as Timothy Paul Jones says right here, when we distort them into a hell-spawned idol, that's when we start to experience problems. And that's what our American culture is experiencing today, is students who are struggling with anxiety and depression because our culture has created extracurricular activities and screen time as a hell-spawned idol. So, such a problem, what can we learn from this, okay? In the beginning of this class, I talked about how there was two things that I want us as parents to always be thinking about before we sign up little Johnny for soccer team or little Susie for gymnastics, okay? I think such a reality that we see from that school orientation and what we see as a problem in most high schools is a clear picture of the spiritual reality that you and I, and all human beings, we were created with the need for regular periods of rest in our lives. We were created with the need for regular periods of rest in our lives. And not just any type of rest, okay? I'm not talking about laying on the couch and watching your team, the Green Bay Packers, beat the Kansas City Chiefs tonight, okay? But I think that the Lord does use that as a type of rest. But what I'm talking about specifically is rest that moves us to engage in worship, and that moves us to engage in community with the local body of believers. Okay? Rest that moves us to engage in worship and live in community with other believers. This concept of spiritual rest is something that we see implemented all throughout the scriptures, okay? I mean, think for just a moment off the top of your head. Where do we see this idea of rest in Scripture? Where do we see rest? Creation, right? God created everything in 6 days, and then he rested on the seventh. Where else do we see rest talked about in Scripture? Yeah. After God rescues the Israelites, he promises them rest in the land of Canaan. And then what was it that God gave Moses on the top of Mount Sinai? The law. And what was one of the commandments? To keep the Sabbath, right? Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. You have so many places. Consider what Jesus says in the Gospels. He says, "Come to me. Come to me, and I will give you rest." And the hope that you and I have coming to Jesus and the fact that we can experience spiritual rest today, we also have the hope that there will come a day of eternal rest, right? I mean, Revelation isn't the only place, but you read about the kingdom that is to come when the kingdom is in its fullness, when Jesus returns, and when we are standing before him. God's word promises us rest for all of eternity. And so, we see this all throughout Scripture. And I think you would agree that, yes, rest is incredibly important. And I think most Christians all over America would agree that, yeah, rest is essential. We need rest. I mean, we even live in a culture today where culture itself says you got to take care of yourself, right? You gotta have rest. But yet, many of us fail to understand or even practice the spiritual discipline of rest. Many of us fail to implement it as a regular pattern in our life. So often, the life of a family can be so busy that there are no opportunities whatsoever during the week or even on the weekend for the family to rest. Because you have commitments to school, you have commitments to your job, and then outside of that, we're constantly transporting one child to one activity, another child to another activity, and because we have no time, we're going through Chick-fil-A, we're ordering chicken nuggets, chucking them, to the kids in the back seat, and then we're moving on to the next thing, right? I mean, that is the habit of so many families, so many Christian families in America of 2023. And as a result, we feel so drained that it keeps us from opportunities to not just rest, but it keeps us from opportunities to serve on Sunday, to serve and to engage even just believers in the local body during the week itself. And because we fail to intentionally take time to rest, our children, they do as well. They fail to take time to rest. And this problem lies on you and me as parents because it is us who signs them up for X, Y, and Z. It's us that transports them to and from soccer practice. It's us who are the decision makers for our kids. And so my question for you this morning is that let's just consider a family where that is their lifestyle. They're constantly running to and from all these different good activities. But if they have no regular rhythms of quiet meditation, if they have no regular rhythms of just doing activities as a family, or just even having, regular opportunities where the family gathers around the table for a meal, what do you think that child is going to subconsciously learn when it comes to the spiritual discipline of rest? If there's no planned time for rest, what are our children going to subconsciously learn from such a habit? It's not necessary. Right? And even at a deeper level, subconsciously, they're thinking that they're invincible, right? That they are not finite beings. Is laziness a real danger for us? Yes, all right? God has not called us to sleep in 7 days a week and to lay on the couch 7 days a week and to be just, doing absolutely nothing. I mean, Jesus' great commission to us, That's a busy task. That is quite the commandment that Jesus gives us. And so we ought to be busy. But there's also a danger where if busyness just consumes us and we don't have regular rhythms of rest, okay, well, now we're in the other ditch that we're not supposed to be. The ditch over here is being lazy, being a sloth, as Proverbs talks about. But then also there is this ditch where we're trying to act as if we are God when we're not, right? The Lord created rest at just the simple level of reminding you and me that he is God and you are not, and that I am not. And so when we rest, we are actively demonstrating that to the Lord, that when we go to bed at night, we can thank him that, God, I thank you that you alone, that you don't have to rest, that you can watch over my family as we go to sleep, that you are still, you are still actively involved in what's going on in our lives and around the world when we have to rest. I think the other thing, if in terms of this right here, I think another thing that kids subconsciously learn is that it's all about them. Just as much as laziness can subconsciously teach us that it's all about me, I think when we are busy at an unhealthy level, the same problem arises. It's all about me. So when it comes to activities for our kids, I pulled a quote here from Jen Wilkins' article that I was reading. And I want her to speak into this issue because I think what she says, at the bare minimum, it got me thinking, and I hope it gets you guys thinking, okay? So she says this: when it comes to extracurricular activities, man, so many to pursue, so little time. Don't be fooled. The proliferation of activity options for children reflects our cultural affluence, not our child's need to be well-rounded or socialized. Gobs of money are being made off of our misplaced desire to expose our kids to every possible talent path. Because the four Wilkin kids are close in age, our schedule and finances force us to limit activities to one or none for each child. Now, not all families need to impose a limit this low. And I just want to pause right there, okay? Her saying that is so important because this is not a black and white solution for every family in the church. Every family is different. Every family has a different bandwidth. And so this is going to look different for each and every one of us. So not every family needs to impose a limit this low. But we have relearned something our grandparents probably knew. Children who participate in no organized activities at all still lead lives full of activity and joy. Too many parents, the idea of a child on no sports team, in no music lessons, at no club meetings is completely foreign and a little frightening, okay? That's me. I mean, if my daughter Charlie was not involved in anything, that's me, okay? Because this is what I would be thinking, this is what Jen points to. Questions such as this: won't they get bored? Won't they drive me crazy lurking around the house? Won't they miss out on an NFL career and blame me? Or, my personal favorite, won't other parents think I'm a bad parent? To which Jen answers, maybe, but who cares? As is often lamented, parenting is not a popularity contest. What are your guys' thoughts to that? And if you disagree, I'm okay with that. Yeah, I mean, I would argue that you could have your kids not participate in anything, but yet you are not still giving them intentional opportunities to practice the spiritual discipline of rest, right? So everything you guys are saying, I give a hearty amen to. And that's why I say that this isn't a black and white thing. And Jen Wilkin would also agree with that. But at the bare minimum, one thing that I really want us to notice from her comment that I think is so true, I guarantee you that you guys would agree with it as well, is her comment about our culture, okay? Where I think she's absolutely spot on. She said there earlier, where was it? This one right here. Gobs of money are being made off of our misplaced desire to expose our kids to every possible talent path. Paul David Tripp, he says something in light of that as well in his book, Age of Opportunity. He says this about culture. He says, the pace of life in our culture is directly related to what the culture thinks is most important. I inserted most there. It's the direct result of a culture that has acquiring and achieving as two of its highest values. I mean, is this not the American dream? When it comes to this dream, culture says that the goal of parenting, in order for your kids to experience the American dream, you have to produce children who pursue big dreams, who become happy, and then at the end, achieve retirement as quickly as possible. That is the American dream for so many Americans. And what's the pathway to this American dream? Culture will say that it's through accomplishments in things such as sports, in academic settings. And if you achieve in one of those two things, then your child is going to secure popularity, they're going to secure happiness, and they're going to secure future financial success. Thus, America's saying, yes, well done. If we're not careful parents, we will design a schedule for our children that follows culture's pace of life, even without knowing why we have made the decisions that we've made. Timothy Paul Jones, again, he says, I think this is so helpful. If children were nothing more than a gift for this life, a single-minded focus on children's happiness and success might make sense. As long as the family's frantic schedule secures a spot for the child in a top-tier university, forfeiting intentional spiritual formation for the sake of competitive sports leagues and advanced placement classes would be understandable if children were a gift for this life only. Perhaps working around the clock would be plausible provided that your children's friends are visibly impressed with a house that you can barely afford. If children were a gift for this life only, maybe it would make sense to raise them with calendars that are full but souls that are empty, captives of the deadly delusion that their value depends on what they accomplish here and now. But children are far more than a gift for this life. And he's right. When it comes to our kids, we have to realize that they are eternal beings whose life will far outlast the life here in this world. Jesus says in Mark 8:36, he says, "For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul?" And, I think as parents, I think we can ask a very similar question when it comes to our kids. And what does it profit them? What does it profit our son to commit to efforts to gain athletic scholarship, but yet never experience regular times of prayer and reading the word with mom and dad? What does it profit my daughter to work hard and to succeed in gymnastics and yet never know the rhythms of a home where we are willing to release any dream at any moment if we become too busy to disciple one another and those in our church family? What will it profit my child if of our church family to spend all their time working hard outside of school for the purpose of one day being accepted into the finest university here in America, and yet never leverage their lives for the sake of proclaiming the gospel to the nations? Again, please hear me out. I'm not saying an X to extracurricular activities. Sports was in musicals. Those were things that I was very busy with those things as a kid growing up. Played basketball, football, baseball. I was in musicals in middle school, and it was great. I learned a ton from those experiences. I don't regret those one bit. I am thankful that mom and dad put me in those things, okay? But what I am suggesting is that if our goal as parents is to leverage our family's life for the advancement of God's kingdom, then I think we really need to ask ourselves some questions at the bare minimum before we sign up our children for activities. And even if our children are in activities, I think we have to ask ourselves these questions. So first off, how can we tell if our child, if we've allowed them to be involved in too many things? What are things that we can look for? How can we tell if our calendars are too full? Okay, here are some questions to ask yourselves. One, what's their behavior at home? Are our kids constantly cranky and tired? Are we as parents, are we constantly cranky and tired? Other questions to ask. Is our kids' schoolwork, is that going downhill? Are these commitments, are they sabotaging our weekend downtime and even worship? Are these commitments sabotaging times around the table as a family to eat? Are these commitments, are they sabotaging bedtime? Are these commitments pulling our family apart, or are they bringing us together? What about with our church family? Are these activities that my child are these activities, and I think this is a really practical one, are these activities that they can enjoy later on in life, or is it only for just a small sliver of their life that they can enjoy these activities? Can they benefit it when they get into adulthood? And the last one, can we afford it? I think these are all really, really good, healthy questions that we have to think through. And you know what? You may go through those questions with your spouse, and you may agree, you know what? No, we're doing good. Things are going right. This is a good activity for them to be a part of. You might also think to yourself, you know what? We may need to take a step back from this for a season and then reevaluate it another time. So I encourage you to talk with your spouse before you sign your child up for whatever activity. And if you choose to sign your child up for something, I encourage you to think through and to talk about, okay, if we are going to commit to little Johnny playing AAU basketball, then where in our time as a family, where in our schedule are we going to be intentional to implement the spiritual discipline of rest? Where we have slow afternoons, where we have opportunities to gather around the table as a family, where we have regular connections with other believers here at Buck Run, okay? When are those things going to happen? And if you look at your family schedule and you can see a pathway for that to happen, then I think you have God's blessing to pursue those activities for your child to be in those things. See, we are finite human beings. Your children are finite human beings. Rest is essential, not just for our physical needs, but also for our spiritual needs. Rest is so, so important. The mind, body, and soul, they are so deeply interconnected. And when you deprive it of its needs, it negatively influences its other needs. When your kids are well rested, it gives them an opportunity for a running start at Christ likeness, and it helps to avoid the unpleasant habits of fits, of back talking, of forgetfulness, of drama or loneliness or anxiety or depression. So, with the time that we have spent up to this point, I really encourage you to give your opportunities regular habits of resting so that it will encourage them and engage them in worship. So rest is something that we really have to think through before we engage in extracurricular activities. Before I move on to number 2, any other comments? Any other concerns or questions? I think, to add to that in terms of time commitment, I think it's also just a good thing just to talk with whoever's leading it. So let's think about sports in particular. What are the coaches' expectations? I mean, if your child goes on a missions trip with Pastor Will in the summertime, is that going to impact their playing time come fall, winter, or spring? Because I think there are coaches that really do. They don't want this to be a supplementary activity. No, they want this to be your everything. And I think at that point, I think you and your child have to count the cost. And maybe it is, you know what, I may not start in basketball, but I still want to play. And that's having reasonable expectations going into that. But it also could be, is this a good person to expose my child to? Or are they going to feed them things that are not biblical and are not healthy? All the more reason we have to pray and ask for the Lord's wisdom in decisions that we make. So let's move on to our next one. And in this one, I've kind of already mentioned it, but I really want us to consider the importance that we guard our family's time, okay? And I'm going to expound on this I think there's 2 levels to this, okay? The first level is just your family in your home, the ones that you live with, guarding your time as a household family. But you're also part of another family, are you not? And guard your time with your church family. In Hebrews, the author, he says this in chapter 10. He says, and let us, he's speaking to churches, let us consider how to stir one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Guarding your time in the home and with the church body is absolutely important when thinking through extracurricular activities for your kids, especially when they are at a young age. Because when your child gets to middle school or when your child gets to high school, you want your child to see their home and to see their church family as being the first places where they feel loved, where they feel safe, where they feel accepted and known. But if your child sees their basketball team or even sees their coworkers as that place instead of your home or instead of your church family, because that's who we've allowed our children to spend the most time with, then when a crisis hits, and there will be crises that our kids will face, and when your child is wanting to open up to someone, who do you think your child is going to go to based on how we have created their daily schedule? Most likely, not always, but they're going to go to the ones that they've spent the most time with. And so more likely than not, they're not going to go to you or to a mature believer in the church. We don't want our kids' lives to be so busy that they find it uncommon to have afternoons where the whole family, is home together. We don't want our kids' lives to be so busy that they find it uncommon to attend things such as midweek or community group or even just having a family over from the church, having them over for dinner. Or having your next door neighbors over for the purpose of just showing the love of Christ and potentially the opportunity to evangelize. We want our children to be influenced by the right people. And influence can really only come through time spent together. Paul says this in Ephesians. He says, church, pay careful attention then to how you walk, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time because the days are evil. So don't be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. I think as Christians, our family schedules, they should look different than the culture's schedules, if not radically different. Activities, they are great. They are good. Even activities that give us opportunities to engage with the community, those are good things. We want to teach our kids to live on mission. But we want to be careful that as we're trying to teach kids to live on mission, we don't want them, at the expense, our kids finding that they have more community with their teammates, more community with their colleagues than they do with those in their home or with those in their church. So my practical advice is to have conversations with your spouse. Consider your family's commitments. There ought to be regular rhythms in our calendars for slow afternoons, evening meals as a family together, times of prayer and sharing of our faith and struggles that we're currently dealing with, times for Sunday mornings of shared worship, and times of regular fellowship with other believers. May the gospel, not the American culture, may it be the gospel that shapes our lives and the pace for our families' lives. So, if you haven't heard anything, please hear this. Consider rest and the need for spiritual rest. And then 2, guard your family's time, both in the home and with the church body. Because those 2 things are they are 2 huge needs that you and I need, that our kids need, and what I'm seeing in our culture of American Christianity, it's those 2 things that are often compromised so that our child can pursue X, Y, and Z. We want them to pursue X, Y, and Z, but not at the expense of these things that we talked about this morning.